Let it be called that Dr. Clarke was almost Nostradamus-like in many of his comments over the years. Let it be reminded to the country where we stand now today, thanks to foresight and understanding that in some would seem almost common sense, but I think oftentimes we need to be reminded of them. So let's not make a good crisis go to waste this time. Siobhan Campbell.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Sir Davis. How are you?
I am very good. You?
I'm doing quite well. It's now what? Nearly a month. Almost just 3 days away from a month away from Hurricane Melissa. I suppose we can now reflect a little bit. We've had enough distance from the trauma, so to speak. So I wanted to start this morning with a little trip back into memory lane, so to speak. And I want to say, listeners, I'm going to start off with a clip from our former Finance Minister, Dr. Nigel Clarke. And I want to keep in your reference in your mind that this is before Hurricane Melissa, before Hurricane Beryl. This was late 2023 when he did an interview with the Fitz. Have a listen.
Big bosses from the IMF coming down for the announcement, and a little storm began to develop in the Eastern Caribbean. I forget the name of it. Was it Matthew? I'm not sure. I can't remember. This is 2016. And this is Jamaica here. And everybody's tracking the storm, the hurricane, and it's doing this. And it is the closest direct hit that Jamaica has had in 30 years. Closest to a direct hit. And we were all convinced that this hurricane was going to hit Jamaica directly. Right? As a result, people from the fund, they packed up, headquarters called them back, left Jamaica. The big announcement was not going to happen. And in that moment, I was not Minister of Finance then. I was Ambassador of Economic Affairs. And I was responsible for the relationship with the multilaterals. And I negotiated this program, this $1.6 billion program. Right? And then it became abundantly clear to me, my God, if this thing had hit in terms of fiscal, we started to calculate that what we were negotiating couldn't help us. Yeah? And it became abundantly, and it just calculating what the reversal would have been, all the progress made by the previous administration would have gone out the window. And it became very clear to me. And I said, look, if I get the chance, I will never leave Jamaica exposed to the effect of natural disaster again.
That was Dr. Nigel Clarke explaining the nexus of the current set of disaster risk contingencies. Jamaica is currently utilizing those to ease some of the pressure of the Hurricane Melissa fallout. Dr. Clarke and the current administration has recently received significant kudos for orchestrating these suite of measures totaling some $657 million, which will aid in keeping Jamaica on top of the significant post-Melissa needs. Now, looking back, Hurricane Matthew, as Dr. Clarke described, was more or less a crisis avoided as the storm moved away from the country at the final hour. So while most of Jamaica brushed it aside as the threat it represented, leave it to the country's future finance minister to take notes and lessons of its near disaster to heart. There's a saying, listeners, never let a good crisis go to waste. In political parlance, it means using a moment of significant tragedy to fuel change. And we in Jamaica are no stranger to this sentiment. The 2008 financial crisis brought home the necessity of fiscal responsibility. It's a mantra that has dramatically changed how Jamaicans and the political directorate discuss matters of economic and monetary policy. But too often, some Jamaicans are too slow to learn. Because, you see, fiscal prudence isn't about holding down the fort only when times are tough. It's about remembering that there are always tough times ahead. You can't plan around a crisis, listeners, viewers, but you can always bank on one and prepare for it. We lurched from 2008 to 2011 financial crises, to the 2019 COVID-19 crisis, to Beryl in mid-2024, followed by Raphael in late 2024, and now Melissa in 2025. And I let Dr. Nigel Clarke hammer the message home again.
Under this government, we have had choice. We graduated from an IMF program in 2019. We went through COVID on our own steam with homegrown policies, homegrown ideas. We displayed fiscal responsibility before the crisis, during the crisis, after the crisis, leading Jamaica to one of the fastest, most complete recoveries in the Western Hemisphere. We piloted Jamaica through the worst economic storms in our history, Madam Speaker, on our own. responsibility.
That's Dr. Nigel Clarke speaking on the budget debate. I believe that was back in 2024. Now, the country's fiscal rules have been suspended, allowing us to break from plans to reach and maintain the 60% debt to GDP target programmed in years ago. It's only the second time since the rules were set down that they've had to be adjusted. And interestingly enough, both times have been under the current administration. Many forget that during the COVID-19 pandemic, the government under Dr. Andrew Holness adjusted the fiscal rules, allowing it to forestall the need to reach that 60% debt to GDP target and put it back to 2029, giving it fiscal headroom to address the immediate needs of the day. In fact, the then opposition spokesman on finance, that's Mark Golding, the current PNP leader, objected to this suspension, fearing what he called a slippery slope. So incensed was he that he wrote a column in the Gleaner stating, and I quote, "The opposition therefore considers that this legislative amendment has introduced an undesirable pathway for the executive usurpation of the fiscal rules." He ended that column saying, "Time alone will tell whether the government's approach to this matter will come back to haunt Jamaica." Now, Jamaicans should be reminded that the country's fiscal rules are not entrenched legislation. They can be amended by the government with a simple majority in both houses. Now, fast forward to 2023, and Jamaica began emerging from the grip of the pandemic, and it was not the government that blinked when it came to the fiscal rules and returning to them.
I would support additional expenditures of up to 2% of GDP to address the critical needs facing the society. That's about $40 billion. It is time to focus on helping our people. It is not the time for excessive fiscal conservatism.
That was Mark Golding speaking in the House of Representatives in a past budget debate. Now, despite the calls, the government maintained its fiscal conservative approach, so much so that the country was on track to hit the 60% target well ahead of the 28-29 date. However, this call for moving away from strict fiscal targets has been repeated by the opposition and others many times, including up to the 2025 elections. In fact, every time a crisis is in the rearview mirror, there are calls for easing up and spending more. I remind you the intention of the opposition was to tap the fiscal space created by the reduction in debt to GDP, coupled with what they called natural growth in revenues to fund their election promises. The question now forms, with hindsight being 2020, what fiscal space and what revenues? Where would the nation be at this time of a disaster again if the government at any point on this journey caved to pressure to spend more than what was absolutely necessary to navigate hard times? I don't say all this to embarrass the opposition or any Jamaican. I recognize that life on our little island isn't exactly easy, and wanting more help from the government is only natural. I say this as a reminder to Jamaicans and the government: don't make a good crisis go to waste. Let this be the final nail in the coffin of grandiose calls for more expenditure on the basis of political convenience. Let this be the reminder during any electioneering, any budget debate presentation, of the dangers of easing up. I leave you again with the words of Dr. Nigel Clarke as he departed Jamaica for the IMF. Let it stand as his legacy and a future warning.
There is no breathing space. It is crisis on top of crisis that you have to be able to navigate, which is why I've put such an emphasis on resilience. That, if it's one thing that has characterized my tenure as Minister of Finance and the Public Service, it has been to emphasize the preeminent need for resilience for the Jamaican state to be prosperous and to succeed. Resilience economically, making sure we have low debt, high reserves in our central bank, and the framework to sustain low and stable inflation. And economic and resilience to natural disaster and other forms of resilience.